stop scrolling for a moment, because there's a quiet truth about children who grow up ignored. And if you're listening closely, you might recognize yourself in it. Children who grow up unseen often become adults who feel invisible, even in a crowded room. They walk into conversations already expecting to be overlooked. They enter relationships wondering if they're too much. And when something good happens, when they succeed, achieve, or finally feel proud, they don't celebrate. They wait for it to pass unnoticed because that's what feels familiar. This isn't because they lack talent. It's not because they're weak. It's because their sense of self was built in silence. Psychologists call this internalized emotional neglect, a pattern where the brain quietly learns, my needs don't matter. Over time, that belief becomes automatic. And most painful part, many people who live this way don't even realize it happened. Because neglect doesn't always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like absence. Picture a child standing in a busy room. They gently tug at their parent's sleeve. They wait. They hope. But no one looks down. That child doesn't scream. They don't demand attention. They quietly step back. On the outside, it seems harmless. But inside that child's mind, something powerful is forming. Because for a child, being ignored doesn't feel neutral. It feels like rejection. Childhood neglect isn't always abuse. It's often subtle. Unanswered questions, forgotten moments, distracted parents, missed birthdays, constant later, that never comes. Children adapt, but adaptation isn't healing. They adapt by shrinking, by staying quiet, by deciding it's safer not to need. Over time, the brain wires itself to expect dismissal. The nervous system learns anxiety as a baseline, and the child stops asking, not because they don't care, but because they've learned it hurts to hope. That child doesn't disappear. They don't fade away. They don't stay frozen in time. They grow up, and the world sees an adult. But inside, the child is still there, quietly shaping every reaction, every relationship, every expectation. They become the adult who struggles with self-worth, even when they've achieved more than most people around them. Compliments feel uncomfortable. Praise feels suspicious. Deep down, they're waiting for it to be taken back. They become the adult who doubts their own feelings. Before they speak, they second-guess. Before they set a boundary, they apologize. Before they trust their instincts, they look to someone else for permission. They become the adult who avoids asking for help. Not because they don't need it, but because needing feels dangerous. Because asking once meant being ignored, and the body remembers that pain. Others become adults who desperately seek approval. They over-explain. They overgive. They exhaust themselves trying to be easy to love, hoping that this time, someone will finally stay. From the same wound, different survival strategies grow. Some become people pleasers, terrified of abandonment. They say yes when they mean no. They prioritize everyone else's comfort over their own. They believe love must be earned through usefulness. Others go in the opposite direction and become hyper-independent. They rely on no one. They trust no one. They convince themselves they don't need connection at all. Because if you don't need anyone, no one can disappoint you. Some turn into perfectionists. They chase achievement, excellence, recognition. They believe that if they're impressive enough, someone will finally see them. But the satisfaction never lasts. Because no amount of success can heal a wound created by emotional absence. And some give up entirely. They move through life on autopilot. They feel flat, disconnected, quietly exhausted, not sad enough to ask for help, but not alive enough to feel joy. Now imagine being 8 years old. You run home with a drawing clutched tightly in your hands. You work hard on it. You're proud. Your heart is pounding as you imagine the smile you'll receive. You hold it up. Look what I made. Your parent is busy, on the phone, distracted, tired. You wait. Nothing. You try again later. Still nothing. They don't mean to hurt you. They're overwhelmed. They're stressed. They're doing their best. But the child doesn't understand that. What the child learns is simple and devastating. My joy doesn't matter. Now imagine that moment repeating. Not once. Not twice. But hundreds of times. A story you were excited to tell. ignored. A feeling you try to share, dismissed. A tear you hope someone would notice, unseen. Eventually, something changes. You stop sharing your joy. You stop showing your excitement. You stop expecting anyone to care. And that coping strategy follows you into adulthood. As an adult, celebrating success feels uncomfortable. You downplay your achievements. You brush off praise. You feel awkward when someone truly pays attention to you. The ignored child becomes the adult who ignores themselves. They don't check in with their emotions. They don't ask what they need. They don't honor their limits, because no one ever taught them how. Research shows that adults who experienced emotional neglect often feel deep loneliness, even when surrounded by people. They can be in a relationship, in a family, in a crowded room, and still feel unseen, because connection was never modeled as safe. Attention was inconsistent. Affection was unpredictable. So closeness now feels confusing, sometimes suffocating, sometimes terrifying. They learned to survive alone, to self-soothe, to stay quiet, to expect little, and survival kept them alive. But survival isn't the same as living. Living means feeling joy without guilt, needing without shame, being seen without fear, and believing deep down that your presence matters. That is the work many ignored children must do as adults, learning slowly and gently that they are allowed to exist out loud, that their feelings are real, their needs are valid, and their story deserves to be heard. Here's the paradox. Ignored children often grow into deeply empathetic adults. They notice what others miss. They read emotions. They sense tension. They listen because no one listened to them. Developmental psychology shows these children develop heightened awareness as a survival skill. They learned when it was safe to speak and when silence was safer. This sensitivity can become a gift, but it comes at a cost. They tune into everyone else, while tuning out themselves. Their identity can feel blurry, because no one mirrored their feelings back to them. They weren't reflected enough to feel real. So they search for validation, not out of vanity, but out of missing foundation. And yet, something remarkable happens. Many ignored children grow into adults who want to heal. They read, they reflect, they seek therapy, they journal, they refuse to live in silence forever. That desire alone is proof of resilience. Healing doesn't begin with confidence. It begins with recognition, with saying, what happened to me mattered. My needs were real. My pain is valid. Healing looks small at first. Celebrating your own wins, naming your feelings, asking to be heard, setting boundaries, saying, I matter without apology. Neuroscience shows the brain can rewire itself. Every moment of healthy connection teaches safety. Every time you speak and are heard, the nervous system learns trust. Parents who ignored their children were often ignored themselves. Neglect travels through generations until someone stops it. When you heal, you don't just heal yourself. You break a chain. The ignored child often becomes the adult who refuses to ignore others. And in that choice, messy, brave, imperfect, they discover something powerful. They were never invisible. They were waiting to be seen. So if you were that child, if you ever waited for someone to notice you, if you ever felt like your emotions were too much, you mattered then, and you matter now. Like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about healing, psychology, and self-understanding. And remember, you are not invisible.